Hi, welcome to Mindful Conversations. My name is Greg Dwyer. I'm so excited today. My good friend James Mapes is here. He is the author of this book, Imagine That. And I'm so excited because I have the first copy signed a couple years ago. And James is an author, he's an actor, he's a mentalist, he's a hypnotist, and he's a good friend of mine. So I'm really excited. James Mapes, thank you so much.
Great pleasure.
So you were telling me just before that you had a first experience in the pulpit as far as, what, a preacher? Or
Well,
a minister?
actually, the first acting job I ever did was playing Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz in Cub Scouts.
Okay.
And then my mom wanted me to be a minister.
Oh, she did.
We had a little conflict about that, but I was in the pulpit at 13 in Methodist Church.
Wow.
Yes.
Did you
yes.
think you wanted to get ordained?
I thought I wanted to please my mother.
Don't we do that all the time? Yeah, I'm guilty of that too, so yeah.
So, and I produced the first, for my master's degree, I produced the first liturgical drama on the dais of the Lutheran Church in the United States.
Wow, well that's my Lutheran background too, that's exciting.
Yeah.
And then you got into show business, you got into writing. In fact, I met you probably in the 80s. This was the first book that I bought along with the workbook. And then also this tape series, which now I'm sure you're not on cassette anymore, but Quantum Leap Thinking, which literally changed the way I think about everything, and it's amazing.
Oh, it was a great experience. The first book, well, the Quantum Leap Thinking took me 14 years to write.
Okay.
And I threw it in the garbage about 100 times.
You did?
Yep, before I got a publisher.
Okay.
And pulled it out. I mean, writing is the most frustrating thing in the world.
Why?
Because it's alone and it's solo.
Yeah.
And I'm really a performer or a speaker. And I swore I'd never write another book ever. And then 13 years later, I wrote Imagine That.
How long did it take you to read and write this? I mean, to write
13
this?
years.
Okay, and inside here you also have all of these links that people can go online,
Yeah,
right?
it is the first hardbound with an access of 28 videos and an audio on stress reduction and an audio on forgiveness.
Wow.
So it's really fun. This is a fun book. When all the pieces came together, I was ecstatic.
Yeah, I was down in Manhattan, I think a year ago, and I was down at Times Square, and I walked into a Barnes & Noble, and they had like 10 of these on the shelf. And I pulled one off, and I took a picture, and I said, I know this guy, you know. That's remarkable to get on Barnes & Noble and get some space on a shelf. That's not easy.
Oh, I don't know how it happened because
I know
as an author, you're obligated to buy space. The publisher buys space or you buy space.
So you're renting space on a shelf.
Or you're renting space in an airport. No one in an airport bookstore is there unless they've paid the publisher or the author.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's expensive. But I didn't pay anything. It just ended up there.
So how did you do that?
I didn't know I did it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, well, I'm impressed. You got to run out and it's also on Amazon too, right? So
it is
someone
on Amazon.
Get it there. Ignite Your Brain, Creativity, and Peak Performance. Now, the name of the show is called Mindful Conversations. So what do you think the biggest challenge people have as far as their mindset when it comes to success?
Well, I've got a chapter just on fear in there.
Fear.
And fears are kind of my playground. So if we look at fear, I divide fear into 3 different categories. There's delicious fear, which is what I feel if I skydive or race a car or scuba dive or balloon or step in front of an audience.
It's delicious.
And it's delicious because suddenly it becomes exciting and goes to energy.
Okay.
Then there is our primitive fear, our fight or flight. Most people don't know this, that we really are designed to move towards what gives us pleasure and away from what creates fear, even if what creates fear is good for us.
Right.
And even if what gives us pleasure is bad for us.
Right.
So the third fear, which is the most devious, is I call illusory fear.
Illusory. I love it. I love that concept.
Yeah, because rejection, change, success, failure, commitment, poverty, fear of the unknown, all those things are normal for people if it doesn't dominate you. But let's use an example. I'll do two. Fear of failure or fear of rejection. Now, nothing wrong with that. Everybody has that fear. But if the fear controls you and diminishes your life, you've got an issue. But most of the time you don't know that. So why is it called illusory fear? I call this the great deceiver, the great trickster, because the fear manipulates us to make the choices that create the fear.
So we're making choices and then we're creating the fear?
We're creating what the fear represents. So
Okay.
let's take rejection as ultimately isolation. And so how would you create that without knowing it? How would you, Gregory, what would you have to do to make sure you were isolated?
Am I aware that I'm doing it, or I'm not?
You're not aware, and you're justifying.
Well, I would say I want to ask her out, or I want to do this, or I want to call this salesperson, or I want to venture out in the unknown, and I know it's probably not going to work, and maybe I don't do it, or I think in my head that I'm going to fail, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah,
Am I
it's
close?
also so jealousy.
Oh, jealous.
Jealousy is a deep fear of rejection. So if you latch on to someone and that person goes away, you go, well, hey, I'm a nice guy. Why did you do that? But we've created it. Or if you reject someone before he or she rejects you,
I feel safe.
right? You feel safe. You think you've won and you've lost. You've created isolation. So the fear has manipulated you, or you become a bully.
Ah.
All bullies are fearful people.
I wish you told me this when I was in 7th grade.
Oh, I wish I knew it in 7th grade.
Were you bullied?
Oh, I was bullied for 8 years.
Oh, see, I was bullied too, and that's why I got involved in magic. You know,
Oh,
it was
well.
kind of like a security blanket.
As a friend of mine once said, anybody who's been involved in magic, we're all a bit broken.
Yes. and yeah, no,
I was the guy who stayed in his room.
Yeah.
I didn't play football. I was a big guy.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, so
Okay.
rejection,
Yep.
but it all holds true for all those fears: rejection, change, success, failure, commitment,
All right.
poverty. Those fears can be self-created.
I see.
And there's two questions, and we'll give this to the audience, two questions that people who recognize they have a fear can ask themselves. First question, what's the worst that can happen, and am I willing to have it happen?
That's
because
wonderful.
That's a trigger. That question just goes, wow, yeah, I make all this stuff up and it's going to happen.
So I accept it.
And can I handle it?
Can I accept it? Can I handle
Yeah,
it? Is it
because
okay?
when I do a lecture, say, I come to the audience and I say, is there anyone in this audience who has not been able to handle what life has thrown your way? No one.
No one. We're
So
okay.
what's the worst that can happen, and can I handle it? Of course you can handle it.
I've handled it before.
Right. And then the second is an observation that what is your payoff with the question? What's the payoff for holding on to the fear? Whom do you get to avoid?
Okay.
What do you get to avoid saying? Or what do you get to avoid doing?
So there's a secondary gain.
There's a secondary gain. There's always a payoff for
There's
fear.
a payoff.
No, that doesn't mean that logically you've destroyed your life. It's much more subtle than that, because once you fear cannot stand up in the face of truth.
Well, you also talk a lot about love. And I know you as a person. That's like one of your core values.
The core value in the frame of imagine that is that I believe there are only two emotions in life. There's love and there's fear.
Right.
When love exists, fear can't. When
Right.
fear exists, love can't. So gratitude plays in there for getting out of fear.
Yeah.
And all, it's just letting go,
Yep.
which is huge for people. Letting go of somebody who wronged you, letting go of somebody who you think or has actually betrayed you, letting go of losing a person.
Right.
Right? Letting go, and letting go of stuff.
Right.
So letting go is the first step, the main step to letting go of fear.
Right.
So as Gerald Jampolsky said, love is letting go of fear.
That's wonderful.
Isn't that lovely?
Yeah, I remember you recommended a book on that, love and just fear and the concept.
So it's all about forgiveness.
It is about
Yeah.
forgiveness. Yeah. You should have been a preacher.
Well, I am in my own way.
You are.
Right?
Yeah, you are.
Listen, this was the funniest thing. My wife was watching me do a workshop.
Okay.
And at the end of it, she said, you haven't run away from religion.
No.
Everything that you say, and one of my best friends in St. Thomas is where I live
Right.
part of the year, is an Orthodox Jew
Wow.
who has fallen in love with quantum leap thinking.
Right.
And he came up and he says, I have to talk to you. And that is, you preach the same thing we preach.
Wow.
There's so many truths in this book, and it's accessible to people. It's not,
Right.
I don't make people wrong.
Right.
Blame is just another form of fear.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you blame, we get government, we get this, we get a person, he did it, she did it. Once you blame, I think you're doomed. And my wife and I over 31 we've gone around this a little bit,
Right.
I hear her blame, and it's her child. that blames.
Right.
And by the way, I just don't do that because I carry the cross on my back.
Right. And I remember some of our discussions that you're very protective of who comes into your circle. Like if there are people around you that are toxic or always blaming or negative, I mean, I know you love them and you work with them, but you don't surround yourself with people that are going to drag you down.
No, and we've talked about this before, and this is really, really important, I think, is our brains adapt. My brain is already adapted to being here. We adapt to 5 minutes.
We're connected.
And so, but we do this with toxic people. Our brain starts to adapt to a toxic. 5 minutes. That's all it takes.
Okay.
So
cut your ties in four and run.
Our dinner parties, people are amazed when they come to our dinner parties. We've got doctors, we've got lawyers, we've got producers, we've got actors, we've got athletes, we've got all, and they're all cheerleaders for each other.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So no, there's no toxic in our lives.
Yeah. Well, what advice would you give our viewing audience about cutting ties with folks or boundaries? That's the key word, boundaries. How do you maintain boundaries with either clients or with friends or even family? I mean, sometimes family is really toxic.
Funny, and imagine that I talk about is the most important thing is to express your boundaries. Because, for example, I've had people in my life who, if I don't call them 3 times a week, they get upset. They're not in my life now.
Right.
But there are people
right.
who must be connected. So I say, look, whether I see you in a week or a month or 2 years, I love you. You're my friend.
Right.
You'll come into my home. You do this, you do
right.
that.
Right.
So it takes courage and breaking through fear to express your truth without blaming. When I do, say, private clients, and somebody has a forgiveness issue, maybe it's a parent who's been dead for 25 years, they're still blaming. I have them write a letter to the person, either living or deceased, for as long as it takes. It could be 5 pages, they condense it down to 1 page. They have to put it away for 24 hours and reread it and eliminate anything that sounds like blame. You don't, and blame is a very tricky business, because if I say to you, it's your fault, or you did this to me, I become the victim. If I say, what you did made me feel hurt, I'm being accountable for my feelings, or it whatever it is, what you did, and if they get upset, so they get upset.
Right.
But I do it with love, as you do. I mean, this is our job.
Yeah, well, the one thing that I've noticed being in the ministry and working with people is people have a map of reality, and you put people together and the maps don't match. And so it's a challenge. Someone's coming from a place of fear or blame or love, or it's just past stories that they've been telling themselves, and they bring that baggage into the relationship. It's not easy.
No, it isn't easy. And most people, they just don't know.
They don't know. They're not aware.
I always look at the 4 steps of creativity. You don't know that you don't know.
Right.
Which is a state of ignorance.
Yep, the state of
ignorance.
ignorance.
And then you don't know, which you can fall in the trap of being a victim.
Right.
Or then you know that you know. The trap is arrogance.
Right.
And then you don't know that you know.
Right.
Which is you've arrived.
You arrived.
You've become. And that's why one of the things I'll do this. I mentioned that I was going to do this.
Yeah.
Let's talk about change. Because change, we want it, we don't want it.
It's scary.
It's scary, and then our DNA, it's tough.
Yeah.
So we can do this at home too. If you put your hands together like this, right? Now take them apart, move them over 1 digit down, and put them back together, and tell me the difference in your feeling.
It's weird. It's very strange.
Right. Weird, uncomfortable, unnatural.
It's not natural.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So all change, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, or socially, all change at first creates a sense of awkwardness.
It's awkward, yes.
So part of the issue with change is to understand that if you persevere, and if the change is a good change, and some changes, and that suddenly it becomes comfortable, and you don't know you've changed. It becomes what I call the new normal.
The new norm, right.
The new norm.
Right.
And so what stops people from change, this is interesting too. Often in client relationships, when I do private coaching, is people say, my family is sabotaging me for being here with you.
How do they know that?
Well, they don't, because what happens is the people that are most likely to sabotage you when you change for the better
Okay.
are the people closest to you.
Sure.
If so, that's what happens. What happens when, say, 5 couples are in a group and one person loses their spouse? Suddenly, it becomes awkward, and eventually you may not be there.
Right. They push them away.
Because they push you away,
Right.
or you push yourself away. So, so the sabotage comes out of fear of the people closest to you.
That's right. They
And-
want to hold you in that. They want to
Yes.
hold you in that pattern, whatever that pattern is.
Yes, and how many times have you heard either spouse chooses to go to a psychologist or psychiatrist? Usually, by the way, this is a man's issue. And then suddenly, if you go, you're not going, you know,
yeah.
and because they're afraid of whatever being left, they're afraid of radical change, or they're just plain guilty about what he or she has done.
Sure.
So the message to people is that, what do you need to change? Oh, here's my magic wand question. I say this at the beginning of every seminar. If you had a magic wand and you could wave it and change one thing in your life in the next 3 months, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, or socially, that would elevate your life personally and or professionally to a new level, what would you change? That's a heavy question, because everybody, I think, has a desire to change something, to become just, I call it living an exceptional life. It's why not keep working on ourselves?
Growing to your full potential.
Absolutely, and I don't know that we ever reach that, but it's certainly the process of growth is like the process of writing. If you don't write, or as an actor, if I am not on camera or on a stage, or as a mentalist or a hypnotist, I get rusty.
Well, let's talk about hypnosis, because I love hypnosis. You do clinical hypnosis and stage, right?
I started clinic. I had a clinic in New York for 12 years.
Okay.
And it was called the New York Hypnosis Center. And I had that 1982 or 3. And 3 years after I started doing clinical, I said, listen, I want to do stage hypnosis. Well, there was no resource to go to.
Right.
Nobody taught stage hypnosis, and now people are teaching it all the time.
Yeah.
So I taught myself. My first show was an utter horrible disaster. It was a place called Ike's Warehouse in Binghamton, New York. I slid up on the bald tires of my old station wagon, and so it came up and walked in, and there were 2,000 drunk and stoned people. And the dressing room had a wall kicked out of it.
Oh my
And
goodness.
graffiti all over the wall, because
Oh my
it was, that's what they had, rock bands there.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't even know to ask for a long mic cord.
Wow.
It was, I lost my voice the first night.
Oh my
And I
goodness.
called up, and my first wife, and by the way, that's another thing, we're still the greatest of friends. And I've been
Oh, that's
with
nice.
Yeah, I've been with Susan now 31 years, and I was with Catherine for 16 years. So it's just the way it had to be. I had to make that happen. We were like fire and ice, but we had great times. And I called her, and I was crying. And I'm sneaking off in the middle of the night. I'm not going to take my paycheck. She said, if you leave, you will never live with yourself. I know you. And so I rethought how to do a hypnosis show. And that was the beginning of, and then it won all sorts of awards, and we've done it on Broadway, we've done it at Lincoln Center.
Speaking of awards, I just saw on Facebook that you got the Dunninger Award.
I got the Milburn Christopher Award.
Oh, I'm sorry. All
and
right.
that was like,
My
I got
mistake.
a call like 3 months ago. And they told me, don't tell anyone, you're going to
Okay.
be getting this award. And I burst out crying.
Ah.
I burst out crying in a good way, because it's like the Oscar of mentalism.
So tell me about it, because I've never received it. I don't know that much about it. Tell me about it.
Well, Dunninger's widow set up a trust.
Okay.
And what they do, I got the 15th one ever given. And what they do
Amazing.
is every year they give an award to, say, the best close-up magician, the best illusionist, the best writer of magic, the best up-and-coming. And I thought people had forgotten my mentalism show. I mean, I did it for years and years, and then I dropped out of mentalism because I wanted to focus on doing the hypnosis show.
Right.
The show itself, you've never seen the big show, but it is, you could have a 5-year-old child. I do nothing off color. It's a space journey from blast off to touchdown
Oh, nice.
on the starship Quantum.
Ah.
And in the context of that script, I demonstrate everything that is possible, pushing the boundaries. You You can't pick up $2,000 kind of a thing.
You
know?
do that on the right. They're in a box, right?
That one of the clips in the book is,
Okay.
and I'll just tell you. Now, if you've never seen hypnosis, this may sound far out. Greg has seen me do this.
It's wonderful.
The suggestion is what in the state of hypnosis, the suggestion becomes the person's reality, which is about the imagination.
Right.
We can make things invisible. We can see things that aren't there. So I say you're in a box. The box is 8 feet square. You're standing in the center. The box is impenetrable. You cannot move except 4 feet in any
Okay,
direction.
right.
You won't remember I told you that. Wide awake.
Okay.
And you don't know you're in a box,
Right,
right?
right,
Wide awake.
right.
So I walk 12 feet away. I say, come here. They walk right up and stop. I walk around. And then the fun part begins. I start pulling out $100 bills. And I said, maybe you aren't motivated. So I come up $1,000. You walk from here to here, and you can have this 1,000. Sometimes they stop, give up. Sometimes, depending on the person's personality,
Right.
they don't know what to do. And then I go up to $2,000.
Wow.
And in 38 years, I've never lost a dime.
You've never.
But that is a metaphor. That demonstration is what's the box.
What's the box in my life?
That's
What's
the
box
that's
in your
the
life?
question.
Yeah.
As entertainment, it's entertaining. But then I'll say the box is always a self-limiting belief
That's
or
powerful.
fear.
That's-
So what's your box?
Right.
Once you discover the box, you can examine it, you can investigate it. It starts to dissipate.
Well, what helps me is surrounding myself with great people like yourself, other people that have done things. Because when you surround yourself with people, they don't see the box, they don't see the limitations. Like a couple years ago, you said, well, why don't you just do this? I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I think that's the key, to have other people basically reflect back to you their reality.
And one of the great actors of all time became a friend about 10, 11 years ago was Anthony Hopkins.
Oh, yeah.
And he helped me in one of my movie parts, and I worked with him on 2 movies as a coach. Well, we can talk about that later if you want.
Sure.
And he is fearless.
About what? Everything?
He's fearless.
Really?
As an actor, he's fearless.
How? How
he's
did you do that?
fearless. I don't know. He made a decision.
That's amazing.
You know, he made a decision. And he's a bit of an isolationist. It's just who he is. But he gave me great advice on a film I was working on about 10 years ago. And this goes into how do you change? I had to do a character. And the character was a tap dancing, guitar playing, evil Jimmy Swaggart.
Oh my goodness.
In East Texas. Cowboy hat, cowboy boots.
Who did you model?
Well, I had to create the character because
Okay.
I couldn't really model anyone. I had to take tap dancing lessons. I had to
Oh,
do this. But
wow.
he became my coach. And one of the things he said is, look, because it was a substantial part, he said, read the script 500 times before you start to form a character. I said, Tony, 500 times?
Really?
I know actors on Broadway who do 100. That's a lot. I said, how about $4.99? He said, you're cheating. You're
That's
not doing-"
amazing.
So I bought a clicker.
You did.
And it took me 2 months. And guess what happened? I became the character.
It's almost like brainwashing.
Well, it's self-hypnosis. It's what we do to ourselves all the time.
Well, I have to ask you, because you are known as the guy with the lemon, and what's that painting or that somebody did a Hirschfeld, and you're like this, right? You're holding it. Can you talk about why you made this?
This is the beginning of every talk or every show that I've ever done in my life, whether it's a lecture or a show. So I'll just do this for you, and then you'll understand, I think, the power of the imagination. So what I'd like you to do is, and let's make this a little easier this way.
Ooh.
Okay, so when I come out on stage, I go, in a moment I'm going to count to 3, and I am going to take a bite out of this lemon. And what I want you to do is to pretend or imagine that you have a lemon in your hand and that you bite it, like a child would play. And in order to do that, you have to recall what makes a lemon a lemon. Obviously, it has a certain shape. It has a very tart smell. It is yellow, and it has juice inside of it, right? So I'll count to 3, take a bite out of this, and imagine that you're biting it with me. 1, 2, 3.
Oh,
Good. All right. All right, just a second.
That was an honor.
Yo. Okay. Now, when I do this for an audience, I say raise your hand if you had a reaction to that. Always, 90% raise their hand. 89, 92. And my response is, you just performed the greatest miracle of the human mind. You created a biochemical, neurological happening in your brain with your imagination. Out of nothing. Pure nothing.
Because they didn't have a lemon.
No, pure imagination. The same way we can control our heartbeat, our blood pressure, and our skin temperature in under a minute.
That's
And
amazing.
it's just the imagination. If I said, I want you to imagine the most fearful thing that's ever happened to you, your blood pressure is going to go up, you're going to feel,
Sure.
you may feel flushed. And if I say, imagine the most loving thing that ever happened to you, you're going to have a different chemical reaction. That's why gratitude is healing.
I love gratitude.
Yeah, me too. Very much.
So how do folks get a hold of you? I know you're on Facebook. I know you travel the world. You have a website.
I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook.
So how tell the
Well,
audience.
remember my name, James Mapes.
Yep, James Mapes.
M-A-P-E-S. And you can go to my website,
Yep.
jamesmapes.com. And I have some other websites on hypnosis. And if you just said James Mapes hypnotist, James Mapes speaker, James Mapes mentalist, you get a different website.
So if they need a coach, right?
That's
and I know
what I
you
do.
coach also actors, and you coach people that do mentalism and magic, and
I coach a lot of CEOs, a lot of relationship issues.
Right.
There's none. You know what's interesting is I recently started coaching someone who had a stroke.
okay.
And I almost didn't take it, but it was a favor for a friend. So what happens when someone has a stroke is their self-confidence falls apart.
Oh, I
Their
bet.
life falls
I
apart.
bet.
Their whole
I
life
bet.
has changed. So she couldn't, I won't tell you what she did, but she could not work, and she worked in the arts as a writer. She was ashamed, and she couldn't walk at all. And I thought, what's the worst that can happen if I tackle this? So in 1 year, I've made her different recordings to help her. She's now on a cane. She's now going into a job she was sure she would lose as an editor. And her spirits are up. I didn't do it.
Right.
I coached her with the tools. Think about the lemon for a second, right?
Right.
It changes the brain. So why not? I make people MP3s to reinforce it, because all hypnosis, I think, is really self-hypnosis. Some people disagree with me.
Sure.
But we're hypnotized most of our lives.
I think so. I
You know?
think so. So you don't really need somebody to do this to hypnotize you. I mean, you can do it. Yeah. So we're almost out of time, but I'm going to ask you a question. Can you come back for another episode?
I would love to if it doesn't snow.
Okay, that would be great. So I'm going to ask folks to grab a string. All they'd have to do is get a string and maybe put a key at the bottom.
Key or a wedding
a wedding
ring of
ring.
any
A
kind.
ring, yeah.
So it becomes a pendulum, something that's substantial as a weight.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is next week we're going to have you back.
Okay.
And you're going to talk about how to create magic with this and how to connect this. I've seen you do this live on lectures, and you give everybody a string. You give
I do.
everybody a
The whole
washer,
audience.
the whole audience, and it's amazing to see the magic that happens. And it's not a trick, right?
No,
It's not like a magic trick.
No, not magic. at all.
So next week, a week from now, grab a string, a washer, a ring. We'll have James back, and he's going to talk about how to create magic, or how to at least get biofeedback.
Mental magic.
Mental magic. And yeah, it's not a trick, right? It's
No,
actually
it's not.
like the lemon.
It is.
So, okay, would you give your website one more time before we...
James Mapes, MAPES.com.
Excellent. So if you need a coach, if you need someone as a public speaker, or you need someone as a hypnotist or an actor, James is a wonderful person, full of love, full of gratitude. I'm glad he's a friend of mine. We are out of time. I'm looking at this, James. A half an hour went so fast.
That was fun.
I hope we gave you something to think about, and we'll be back next week. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.